Look, there'll be critics on the left who'll go crazy and say he's cutting too deep, too fast. But you want to make sure that for our young people that this debt and deficit is reined in, because just the debt service on this massive debt that we have is, would pay for all of healthcare across the country.
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everybody. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Tanya.
And we are especially excited for today's interview. This individual has been on Northern Perspective a few times now. We've introduced him as the former Member of Parliament for Flamborough-Glanbrook, David Sweet, the former chair of the Ethics Committee. But it's the first time that we're actually able to introduce him as our dear friend, former MP David Sweet, who has a wonderful slice of heaven out in New Brunswick near Tapasantac. And it is the Ocean River RV Resort. And we had the opportunity to stay there. I believe it was last summer.
Yeah, it was last summer. It seems like forever ago. We need to go back.
And anyway, we are just thrilled to have him back on the show without being incognito. So once again, please welcome to the show former MP David Sweet. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much. And hey, Merry Christmas. My dad always said until January 6th, it's still Christmas. So Merry Christmas and most prosperous New Year to you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, David. Thank you for being here. This is awesome. We can finally shed the puppets and talk like we used to talk. David was actually our former neighbor when he lived here in Ontario. So we had many great conversations about politics. And we always joke that David's the man responsible for getting us into this mess.
I don't think it's a joke at all. I think it's very serious.
A lot of Canadians are very proud of the work you're doing and the unmasking and light shining on some of the issues in Ottawa. I know many people are very grateful. So thanks for your good work.
Well, thank you for your support as always. Even though we may go a couple of months without speaking, every time we do connect, it's like we picked up right where we left off. So, so David, former Member of Parliament, you always have your eye, at some point on Ottawa, kind of like the Eye of Sauron, making sure you're keeping an eye on everything going on. What has been your reaction? What was going through your head when you saw Chrystia Freeland resign and essentially drop that nuclear bomb inside the Liberal caucus?
Yeah, that was, look, it's unprecedented for a finance minister. So if you think about it, the most powerful person next to the prime minister is either a deputy prime minister that the prime minister's identified or the finance minister, unless you're in a wartime, and then it would be the defense minister. So you've got the most powerful person next to the prime minister in cabinet, in the government, who says, I have an economic statement, but I'm not tabling it. I don't have confidence in the prime minister, and leaves cabinet and sits as a normal member of parliament. I do not recall any time in history that anything like this ever happened. And I don't recall a time in history where the mainstream media did not explain to Canadians just how important and how would I say, desperate the situation is when we're dealing with the situation with the United States, who obviously wants some focus on our southern border, their northern border. They want to focus on the fentanyl problem, which we should absolutely agree with them. And now we have a government in disarray. So all of these things have happened. And for those people who are in the know, who are watching social media, et cetera, and see the gravity of what's happened, it's very shaking of the Canadians' confidence.
And, we've had this, what we've been referring to as the Rebel Caucus. You've had a couple of people come out publicly, MP...
Wayne Long,
Wayne Long out of New Brunswick. You've had Ken McDonald. So a couple people that have said, they're not running again, so there's really no political consequences to them. What has been your opinion of the other Liberals that have been, kind of shying away from the public eye, but now are coming out and saying, "Oh, well, I was calling for his resignation for the last year. I'm one of the good guys."
Yeah, to give credit where credit's due, Wayne Long has been critical of the government for quite some time, and for good reason. He listened to his constituents. Many times when he was critical of his government, he was diplomatic about it and explaining just how negatively many of the policies that Trudeau was bringing in were negatively affecting his constituents. But, I was, not only are those people who are finally coming out and saying, hey, all along I wanted, a leadership review, or I wanted Trudeau to resign or whatever, but I was shocked after this bombshell of Chrystia Freeland stepping down, and of course, the absolute nonsense of whether you want to call it an economic update or a mini budget or whatever, not presented in the House, but put on the web. I was shocked by the number of Liberal MPs that made it public that they wanted to be in cabinet. It totally astounds me.
Yeah, it's like volunteering. It's like being sent a notice when you're just about to buy your tickets to get onto the Titanic, and the notice is saying, "Hey, everybody, the ship is going to sink about a couple of days into the voyage, just so you know." And they're saying, "Oh, well, then in that case, I'll pay double to get on." Like that's what this kind of sounds like. And
I want to be in the captain's crew.
That's right.
Right. Put me at the captain's table.
Right. So you have these people. Is it like what's you've been in a government when it was on shaky ground. You've seen kind of the dynamics happen. Like what is going through their heads, if you can even get into their heads, because it defies all logic.
Well, that's it. And, watching Jagmeet Singh, watching the behavior of some of the MPs, as we talked about the duplicity of their behavior, and watching some of them that never spoke out at all in regards to some of the terrible pro-Hamas protests that are happening. It's trying to figure out I think the best way that I can try to put my head around it, knowing, keeping in mind one of my early mentors always said, David, you can't make sense out of nonsense, is that I thought up until Freeland's resignation, there was a lot of hope that somehow they could recover. And I think we may see that Chrystia Freeland's resignation was the straw that broke the camel's back. And finally, there will be enough momentum in the Liberal caucus to finally, they don't have a mechanism to actually oust Justin Trudeau, but they can put enough pressure on him to make sure that he listens and, to his chagrin, resign.
Because at some point, people have labeled Justin Trudeau a narcissist. Even if you don't want to label him that, it's obvious that he is very egocentric in the way he operates. We've seen some of that. We've seen evidence of that from even Chrystia Freeland's letter that she has put out there in public. Do you think that the Liberals' best hope for getting rid of Justin Trudeau is that he's egocentric and that he doesn't want to be embarrassed, and the more that they come out, the more embarrassing it will be for him, so that he should come to a point to just accept, listen, I can't take any more public embarrassment. I want my dignity. I'm going to resign.
Well, I certainly hope that somebody that he trusts and will listen to will sit him down and say, look, all you're going to do is continue to ruin the Liberal Party, continue to ruin your own reputation, and going to make it impossible for you to, serve on any of these international organizations that you wanted to. So I hope that's the case. But on the point of Trudeau in the situation that he's in right now, and what kind of a person he is, if you're a leader who is responsible for, one of the best democracies in the world, and you had the crisis on your hands that you have now, would you go skiing? I mean, think about it. if I was in this situation, of course, I would hope I would never have had the behavioral wherewithal to put myself in the situation that he has. But, if anybody who has leadership smarts was in a situation like he's in, you'd call the best and brightest of your friends and trusted advisors and say, look, what do we do? But he packs up and goes skiing. So I don't think he's taking his position as a leader of Canada very seriously at all anyway.
No, that's a really good point. I mean, if it was us, I imagine that, Ryan would go off to work and say, okay, Tanya, you're watching our son for the week or 2 weeks or however long it happens to be, because I've got work to do. My job as the mother is to take care of the children, make sure that they're okay, make sure that they're looked after. His job would be hypothetically to save the country. And for Trudeau to go, no, I'm going to go skiing with my family. I understand the want as a parent to be there and spend some time with your children, but when the country is falling down around you, you have to put on your big boy pants and realize you can't do that.
But even on that point, David, let's even take that back about a month, because I don't think you would have a situation where Christopher Freeland ended up resigning if he was, taking the country's best interest to heart, because you wouldn't be introducing this GST tax holiday garbage when the priority is the 25% tariffs that are, waiting for you in January. So you would be focused on solving that problem, and you would probably be canceling vacation for all of your cabinet. So you're working through December into January to figure out, how do we get rid of this threat of the 25% tariffs, or expose it for how silly that it actually is, one way or the other. You don't play these, in Christopher Freeland's words, political gimmicks, put that on the Canadian people, which the whole thing was shown to be a fraud and a disaster anyway. And then, to your point, let's go skiing and hope everybody else figures this out for me. Like we saw the same thing when he introduced the National Day of Reconciliation, when he decided to go surfing in Tofino. It's the same thing. It's me before the country.
Yeah, he thinks that he's just a figurehead, that his guys will take care of it, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. And you interacted with him in Parliament, and I assume in some cases outside of Parliament. Does the label on the tin match what is inside?
Look, I don't have a lot positive to say about Mr. Trudeau. I think the best microcosm of a forerunner of what he'd be like was when he called one of our ministers a piece of dung, and then when the speaker upbraided him, he apologized and then smirked for the rest of the afternoon. So. Peter Kent was, and still remains to me, one of the most gentlemanly gentlemen I've ever met. So I think that was, real prophetic about what he was going to be like. And of course, he has behaved in such a way that, he says that he's a feminist and then does exactly the opposite. So what you do speaks so loud, no one can hear what you're saying anyway. To go on holiday, anytime you say this is important, this is a big initiative for us, this is how we're going to end inflation or whatever, supersedes your credibility. But he's famous for this.
Well, and I think probably what we're going to learn is this is going to be the last vacation he's going to be able to take on the taxpayer dime. So he figured, I might as well take it, and I won't really have to pay for it. So.
Well, they have to pay for their vacations usually, unless you get a gift from a rich friend who owns a fancy resort. But taxpayers are on the hook for the security that goes with it.
Yeah.
I gave credit to a Liberal MP. I'd like to give credit to a former Prime Minister now. I remember Stephen Harper so many times would never consider taking one of these rich holidays at the taxpayer's expense, and always stayed in Ottawa. Went to Harrington Lake that was already there and already, the taxpayer was already paying for. and use that for holidays instead of these multiple trips all over the place that by their very nature have to cost a lot because of all the RCMP security that's required for the Prime Minister of Canada. So, I think anybody who legitimately, again, cared for the citizens of Canada, particularly those who are struggling, who are living paycheck to paycheck, who are trying to make ends meet, young people who are trying to buy a house, to do what he's doing is, if some people feel it's a slap in the face, I can understand it.
Now, you have the aftermath of the Freeland resignation. George Chahal just put out a letter that is heavily critical of the Prime Minister. Again, he's voted for all of these policies that have brought just utter destruction on Canada. Some people are giving Freeland some credit now, and maybe this is a prelude to her running for the leadership of the party. But in caucus as a whole, what do you think is kind of going on behind the scenes between the regular Liberal MP members as this government is falling? Like, what's the mentality and what's going on behind the scenes between these people, if anything?
Oh, I'm certain there's lots. All of us would love to be a fly in the wall there.
Of course.
But I'm certain there, as we have already discussed, there are those who want to be supportive of the Prime Minister because they think he can weather it because he's already been pretty Teflonish, if I could say that, up until now. So they want to remain in his good books. I think there's some who have seen the writing on the wall very clearly with polls, with the way their constituents are calling them, et cetera, and have been voicing overtly at the caucus microphone that things need to change. And, like the one public speech that we saw of Trudeau, where he seems to be totally disconnected from reality, where he states that, we're just like any big family in the holidays and we have disagreements, but we work through them. So I would think that some of the more principled Liberal members are probably wondering how they ended up in Oz, and others are, trying to do everything they can to, position themselves for the aftermath so that they might be good leadership contenders or friends of the leadership contender for a possible cabinet position 4, 8, 12 years down the road. That's the best summary of what I think may be going on in the Liberal caucus right now. But I can tell you this, added to that, there's a lot of former Liberal members, John Manley, Dan McTeague, Stephen Ledrew, who used to be the president of the Liberal Party, who are probably making phone calls and trying to rally some folks to end this Trudeau cult and get the Liberal Party back to what it used to be, a center-right party, rather than this socialist Marxist party that have pretty much eaten the NDP lunch.
Yeah, and do you think Trudeau resigns? Do you think if he does resign, he's going to prorogue? How do you think this ends?
Well, again, you're trying to ask me about somebody's head that I totally can't understand. But look, as I mentioned earlier, I think there's enough momentum now. I mean, it's going to be difficult for him to go into a caucus meeting when so many have publicly, and I'm certain many times that privately, have said, you got to go. So how are you going to ever face your caucus, let alone get into the chamber and do something productive? So I think we may have, even for Justin Trudeau, we may have reached a point where there's no return, and he'll need to go. Plus, you've got Jagmeet Singh, who's saying that he's going to table a non-confidence vote. Now, just yesterday, I think it was, John Williamson, the chair of the Public Accounts Committee, has called a meeting of the Public Accounts Committee to move a motion or have a motion presented at the committee of non-confidence that will be tabled in the House when the House returns. So the NDP and the Bloc have signaled that they're going to support that. You know, I'm going to say that I don't know how he'll survive this, but I've said that on a number of other occasions.
So here's a question. Now, we know that the Liberal Party does not have a mechanism in order to remove its leader, and that happened right around the time that Justin Trudeau showed up. Do you know if that's related? Is that coincidence? Do you know how that came about?
I don't. Yes, it's best if I just leave it there. I've heard speculation about it, but yeah, that's a real problem for the Liberal caucus. Is he has to finally surrender. When we had to deal with a previous leader, we had a mechanism where the caucus could do that. I think that's essentially what political parties need, because you see the behavior of one person can literally destroy the entire reputation of the party.
Yeah, for sure.
And the country, and it's undemocratic to allow them to do that. But as we look at this, so we actually covered the motion that the Conservatives were talking about. So that committee meeting, I believe, is scheduled for January 7th. And there's been some talk whether that will have an effect or whether it's, call it, valid or not. And everything that we've read, there is some precedence to actually signify that, yes, this may actually be valid, and this may force this government down. Now it's all on Justin Trudeau, because he's going to have to decide, okay, do I prorogue to get ahead of this, or do I play it out? Or even if he was going to prorogue anyway, this now makes it look like he's proroguing to avoid a confidence vote. So what do you think about this move strategically by the Conservatives?
Well, I think it's, one of the things that the opposition has to do when they feel that the governing party has lost the confidence of the House is to use all the tools available. And I'm grateful to John Williamson that he recognized that he had a tool in the toolbox he could use. And I think regardless of whether the Speaker rules that this is in order, if there's a precedence for it to stand as a general non-confidence vote, the thing of it is, once it's tabled, it has to be debated. And so the debate will begin. And if the NDP this time are true to their word, then they'll be able to introduce their own motion of non-confidence after that debate, after there's momentum from that debate as well. So I think, look, he can prorogue. I think that's just going to put another nail in his coffin, and coffin, so to speak, in his career. Please, folks, that's all I'm talking about. But I think that, it'll just, the terrible thing about it is it will continue to destroy the Liberal Party's reputation. And look, I was a Conservative member of Parliament, but I think our multi-party system has been one that's worked for the country for many years. And for many, many years, we had differences, but there was always one common thread. I know in my career there was, that we may disagree in how we get there, but our concern was always for the country, for the citizens of Canada. We knew that that was the responsibility of government and the House. But it seems that vision has been lost with Justin Trudeau and the present Liberal caucus.
Now, at this point, an election is inevitable. It's going to happen either in the spring, in early summer, or, worst case scenario, it's going to happen in October of this year. And unless something cataclysmic happens on the political landscape, the Conservatives are going to be taking power. So, to a lot of Canadians, as a result of what's happened over the last 10 years, they've lost complete trust in the government as an institution. They don't believe the government is out to help them. They believe the government is only there to enrich the people that are in government. There's no accountability for anyone in government if they do anything wrong. Why should Canadians believe that that is going to change when a Conservative government takes over?
Well, I think he's going to have to rebuild that confidence. I think if he continues to do what he does right now, one of the things I like about Pierre is he travels the country. He meets with ordinary Canadians on a regular basis. He is patient enough to hear their story. And of course, you know that because he relays many personal stories when he talks about issues in the House. But I think the other aspect is he's going to have to deliver on the promises that he made, and he's going to have to do it as fast as he possibly can. And he's already mentioned, and wisely so, that, the cupboard is bare. The Liberals have driven up the debt and deficit to such a degree that, special programs aren't going to be the number one on his roster. But I think if he delivers on those things that he's been talking about in every speech, if he deals with the carbon tax immediately, if he removes the funding from the mainstream media immediately, I think those are two things that, that will bring a lot of confidence to people once he starts to actually deliver on his promises. And the other aspect too is to defund the CBC. I don't, there are mechanisms that he can use, prior to legislation that can deal with these things pretty quickly. If he does that, and I'm certain the next step that he will probably take is something that Jim Flaherty did when we were trying to deal with deficits and debt, and that is to, start a deficit reduction strategy throughout every department in the government, and ask ministers to be accountable for every dime that's being spent, and to unearth programs that are unproductive and spending that's unproductive. I think if he starts to do those kinds of things, and look, there'll be critics on the left who'll go crazy and say he's cutting too deep, too fast. But you want to make sure that for our young people that this debt and deficit is reined in, because just the debt service on this massive debt that we have is, would pay for all of healthcare across the country.
Yeah. It's like $1 billion a week, which is a brand new hospital somewhere in this country every single week.
Well, and the other thing is too, you look at your home situation, right? So I think all of us have probably been in a situation where, something unexpected financially happens and you have to say, okay, all right, we need to make some changes. Are you going to say, well, we'll cut Disney Plus the first month, and then we'll cut Netflix the second month, and then we'll cut, our trip to Jamaica the third month? Or are you going to say, all right, immediately, all of these extras, they're all out now? That's probably what you're going to do. To your point, do you continue to spend to an egregious amount and only gradually cut? Or do you rip off the Band-Aid and say, listen, we're going to be trying to minimize the damage to Canadian taxpayers as much as possible, as soon as possible. So this is what we're going to do. That's what I think he has to do. And I think the sooner he does that, the more support from the public he's going to have as well. If he waits, there's going to be more and more criticism, to your point, from people on the left, from the unions, all of that. But if he really, really dives into that as soon as possible, and he just continues his strong communication plan that this is part of the mandate, he will get through it and he will be successful, I think.
I agree. I think, and by the way, all of these initiatives I mentioned, and I'm certain he has, I think Pierre's probably stayed up night after night after night saying, what are the first 3 months going to look like? Not only will this regain confidence in Canadian citizens, the average person, right? But you got to remember, the markets are a big thing. People, right now who aren't investing because of carbon taxes, because of caps on production in the oil sands in Alberta, those kinds of things. All of that is going to come back. People are going to see Canada as a place to invest again. A principled, fiscally responsible government means that markets will have a renewed confidence as well. Now, it's not going to happen overnight. Well, there might be an uptick right away when the government changes, but it'll be minimal and it'll be short-lived. But within 2 to 3 years, with good fiscal restraint, this is what we saw when we were in a global recession. Canada was the first one to come out of the global recession because of the fiscal restraint that happened during that 18 months. And the only money that was being spent was on hard assets, infrastructure that was going to last for generations, so that those people who were going to deal with the expense later were people that were also going to benefit from the infrastructure investment. So, if he does those kind of things wisely, it's going to be the damage that's been done by Justin Trudeau is going to be long lasting. But I think we'll have a recovery that will be surprising even to some economists.
And the other huge part of the mistrust in government is lack of accountability and lack of transparency. Even though we've had a lot of information come out regarding the SDTC scandal, the ArriveCAN scandal, Randy Boissonneau, and the list goes on and on and on. We still don't have the full picture of any of these, and we still don't have an idea of potentially if there are any cabinet ministers that are tied to any of these and who they are. Do you think it's important, even when the government turns over, for the Conservatives to push to finish those investigations as fast as possible?
Yes, and they'll need to. They'll need to make sure that the Public Accounts Committee is doing its work. It's always behind because there's always just so much to investigate, but they might even strike a special committee for those investigations. In other words, you could have a subcommittee. You could have several subcommittees, actually, of the Public Accounts Committee, each one to investigate, one for ArriveCAN, one for S&C Lavalin, one for SDTC, like that. And they could report to the Public Accounts Committee, and they table the report subsequently. So you could do that very easily. I think that's absolutely necessary to unearth the truth. And to do it as fast as you can as well, because again, as these ugly facts are coming out, it's causing people to have a lack of trust in government. So you want to kind of get the garbage out, get it dealt with, assure Canadians that kind of thing's not going to happen again. As a good leader, that Mr. Poilievre is going to have to make sure that he, very frank and honest with his caucus that none of these kinds of things will happen, and you need to spend the money just like it was your own, rather than somebody else's money. And I think if he does that, and his cabinet ministers are fiscally prudent, and his caucus understands that message, then I think it will go a long way for, as I said, a recovery that I think will even surprise some economists.
Well, and we've even chatted with Mr. Barrett on his private members bill C-405, which won't be seeing the light of day in this government, but in it actually implements hard consequences for being in contempt of Parliament, for lying to parliamentary committees, fines of up to $50,000, minimums of 6 months in jail, up to a maximum of 14 years in jail for committing perjury. We also asked him, will the Conservative government actually put in hard penalties for breaking the ethics laws as well? And his response was a positive one. It sounded like that there's going to be intent to do that. And my advice to him was do that as soon as possible, so Canadians see that you are going to be holding yourselves to account the way you wanted the Liberals to be held to account, but unfortunately couldn't. So I agree. Speed is going to be of the essence of a lot of these things, and I think they're first. It's tied for first in terms of their priorities: affordability for Canadians, but as well as trust in the government and accountability. And I've said this many times: Pierre Poilievre and this Conservative government, they have an opportunity to go down as one of the best governments in Canadian history if they pull this off, if they do it right, to undo the damage here. There's going to be a lot of people that won't like what they're doing, but you can't please everybody. But the goal in democracy is you just please just enough.
And I hope that part of their platform, even though this is not something for today, but in the long term, many of the arguments that we have today are because our own children were not educated on exactly where does the money come from in a government. And I think, the more people understand that there's no free lunch, the more people understand that, one of our adages was that we believe that a dollar kept in a taxpayer's pocket is always better than throwing into a big government that will just, wasted or, cost 5 to 10 times more for a government to deliver services than it does the private sector. So I think we need to train our young people so that we have thoughtful voters in the future who understand that, as you said, the government is not a lot different than a family budget. You cannot continue to spend more than you make without severe consequences happening.
Well, here's hoping that Northern Perspective can contribute a little bit to that as we continue. But as we tell our audience, even when the Conservatives take power, that's when our real work begins. Because we want to make sure that all of the promises and criticisms that have been levied during the Liberal reign are kept and are watched. That's the worst thing that can happen in any country when a government takes over, is the people think that everything's going to be fine and they stop watching them. Well, when the cat's away, the mice will play, as they say. So thank you very much, David, for joining us today on Northern Perspective, and we wish you and your family a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and we cannot wait for the next election.
Thank you, and I'm so happy to say, Ryan and Tanya, have a most prosperous and productive New Year. And again, on behalf of all Canadians, thank you very much for the great work you do. Keep the light shining on, like as you said, on any government to make sure that we know that we have competent people in Ottawa.